in terms of US dollars, your salary is going to go up. Your savings amount is going to go up. Like the nominal value will continue to go up forever. But over time, the real value keeps decreasing, right? So if you're not if you're delaying gratification, your savings will keep rising, they'll keep rising, but you'll be able to buy less with your savings, even though you're delaying gratification. On the other hand, with Bitcoin, it's completely the opposite. Your savings will decrease, you'll get paid a lower salary over time, but the real value of that salary will increase over time. The real value of your savings will increase over time, even if you have less Bitcoin. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean that's so well said because that's the essence of flipping the modern monetary theory fiat
Yes.
unlimited supply of thesis upside down and getting back to sound economics and sound money. But there were a couple of points that I wanted to make there that were rushing through my head when you were saying that. And the first point is about yield and about
Yeah.
cash flow because everybody's always in the mindset of I have to generate cash flow. That's why I work. I work to bring in cash and then I spend it and then whatever's left over I can save. So we're stuck in this ideology that you trade time and energy for currency and then you spend the currency on your bills and then whatever's left over you can save or invest, which is true, but it works against you. And that's what makes me like so passionate about Bitcoin because it works for you. People's Reserve, our slogan is a market maker for we the people. Because we want to empower people. We don't want to extract value from people. And the whole system is a value extraction scheme. And that's when your salary goes up, the real crime here is that actually inflation is theft because inflation, each dollar that they create steals a fraction of a penny out of the dollars that are already in your pocket. That's where it gets its purchasing power from. They can't magically create purchasing power. You can't magically create value. Value,
No.
uh, that's not how the economy works, right? So when they print money and send it out to everybody, they're stealing money from everybody. And the real sad part about it is that the CPI equation is so cooked. It's so, I mean, you're a financial professional. This is
Mhm.
what's that one? This is like Madoff style. This is Ponzi scheme. This is the real rate. If you go back, and I love Trueflation, the name of Trueflation, but what a waste of such a good name because they took a proprietary equation and made it even more worse than the government's equation. At Govflation, we go back and we use the 1982 pre-substitution CPI. So if you
Mhm.
go back and you use this has nothing to do with how I feel about inflation. It's the government's financed equation that they were using, the official equation. It's just pre-substitution. We're at
Can you
11%
can you
today.
just explain what that means? Pre-substitution, what does that mean? Just because
Yeah,
I know there's people who don't understand.
right. Absolutely. So uh, a way that this hits home is when they're able to substitute, they'll have a basket of goods, and then they can choose out of that basket of goods. And basically, they're not choosing to get a fair and honest number. They're choosing to get the lowest output. So, if filet
Right.
mignon goes up 10%, but hamburger meat goes down 10%, well, hey, the price of meat just went down 10%. They
Yeah.
can pick and choose from that basket in order to cook the books. And what's happening is they're cooking it so much that government CPI today is less than 3%. But if you use the 1982 version, it's actually greater than 10%. It's almost
Wow.
11%. So, someone who thinks, oh, I'm getting a 4% raise, like you said, actually at the end of it, even with your raise, you're buying less stuff. So the performance in stocks, the performance in your savings account, the performance of your wages, if you're not deducting real CPI from that
Hmm.
number, then you don't understand what your real rate of return is. Sure, your nominal rate of return might feel like you're making extra money, but that's in the pit of everybody's stomach. Everybody knows right now, hey, I'm making more money, but I'm buying less stuff. What the heck's going on here? Well, what's going on is that inflation is not accurate. And the problem with that is that it trickles down, to use their terms, it trickles down into GDP. Because when you look at CPI, things are trending back towards 2% target. Everything is good. When you look at GDP and you take nominal GDP and you reduce it to get real GDP, in other words, you want to account for price increases not as economic growth. So you have to deduct those price increases. You have to take the rate of inflation and deduct it from nominal GDP. so that you
Yes.
don't mistakenly account price increases for economic strength. Well, their CPI is so understated that it's actually overstating GDP. So that's why the
Right.
Federal Reserve is lowering interest rates at a time where CPI is heading back down to target and GDP is saying we have a strong economy. Both of those signals are saying you should not be lowering rates. And when you look at gold going to new all-time high prices, that's signaling you should actually be raising interest rates. So something's going on here where the Fed knows, right? They're not just going to lower rates, especially when the two things they're telling everybody to look at is saying don't lower rates. So what are they looking at? What are they figuring out? And that's when you look at some of these other economic indicators. Like first of all, unemployment. Unemployment has been above the midline for like 9 consecutive quarters now, which signals contraction. And actually, that contraction is accelerating, which is what triggered the SOM rule. And when you look at manufacturing, manufacturing's been below the midline since the first quarter of 2023. Then when you look at credit card delinquencies going up, you even at the rate of consumers eating out instead of eating at home, signaling that there's a lack of discretionary spending. People are, they at the end of it, they go and they work, they pay their bills. There's not even enough left over for them to go eat out. And that is as bad as it was during the great financial crisis and almost as bad as it was during COVID. It's like the third worst time over the last 24 years. So these are like, they're not promoted economic indicators by the powers that be because it's not CPI and GDP, and that is what we say it is. But when you look at the reality of the economy, all the warning bells and whistles are going off, and everything is saying we need to lower. We shouldn't have just lowered rates 50 basis points. We should have lowered rates 300 basis points. And then, some people come back to me though and they go, well, that's wrong because that would create more inflation. But Raja, I think this goes back to the lack of people's financial education, which makes the work that you do and I do and everybody else in Bitcoin who's delivering these orange pills so important because people need to understand where they're getting gamed here. They need to understand what's going wrong. And me and Max Kaiser, we were actually put in Forbes probably about 6 months ago when we talked about the debt death spiral. And the interesting fact was that we are so far along in this process that when you raise interest rates, when you have everything in your game plan and your game theory is set to neutral and things are working the way they should be, when you raise interest rates, sure, that fights inflation because it makes the cost of capital go up. So less people seek credit, and inflation is the expansion of the currency supply and the extension of credit. They're both the same thing. So it fights against it. It creates a deflationary power. But we are not in a normal playing field. The United States government has $35 trillion worth of debt, $217 trillion of unfunded liabilities. And everybody knows now that the government's net interest expense and expenditures have become the number two line item cost in the United States government budget, even more than Medicare and military. So when we raise interest rates, it actually forces the cost of the government's deficit spending to increase substantially. So this might seem like a radical statement, except especially to some of your listeners who are more financially sophisticated. I believe the United States Treasury has lost the ability to create demand for U.S. Treasuries by raising interest rates. And I think that was I think they just figured that out. And I think they said, well, hey, actually, if we lower rates again, the net interest expense is going to go down. Right. And now the fear, the counterpoint to that is, well, inflation is going to go back up. No, it's not. Prices are going to go back up because there's going to be increased demand against a limited supply. So you're talking about the economic force of increased demand from all that money on the sidelines that was getting the 5% plus, no
Yeah.
longer going to be incentivized to save, rushing back into the assets, rushing back into the goods and services. And now you have a new supply demand equilibrium, which is going to produce a new price. But when we talk about inflation, there can be no change in supply, there can be no change in demand, and prices still go up because it's not supply or demand that's changing. It's the purchasing power value of the currency itself. And that I
It's
think
the
is the
number.
most powerful thing.
It's basically just the number of dollars chasing the number of goods is increasing because they keep adding more and more. And then with the interest, essentially what they're doing is because the US government has to borrow even more money to pay the interest, Federal Reserve has to print more dollars and add them to the economy. So like you said, it's a death spiral and
Yeah.
it'll continue to get worse, continue to get worse. And that'll probably happen for a very, very long time until the US dollar collapses.